Hello and welcome to another edition of Call the Doctor. And I'm pleased to say that Dr Bob Gill's back in the hot seat again this week. Welcome back, Bob.
Hi, Chris. Good to be back.
Yeah, nice to see you, mate. Nice to see you. First of all, should start by making an apology. I was chewing gum throughout the last week's episode, and my partner, she watched it back and was telling me off for chewing gum. So my apologies to anybody who was offended by my constantly chomping away during the course of last week's show. But anyway, I'm Chris Williamson. I'm the Deputy Leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, and in tonight's show, we're going to be returning to the Zionist lobby's attacks on Britain's medical professionals. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the case of Dr Ghassan Abu Sittah. He's an esteemed reconstructive surgeon who's spent 3 decades treating civilians injured in wars. But the Zionist lobby's trying to destroy his career over bogus anti-Semitism allegations. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? And we'll also touch on Palantir, the software company which is implicated in war crimes in Gaza. It specialises in big data analytics, artificial intelligence, and data integration for government agencies as well as the military. Now, it's been awarded, people may have seen this, it's been awarded the contract to handle patient data for the NHS. And it seems that Peter Mandelson, the disgraced Peter Mandelson, helped to secure a number of other government contracts too. And earlier this week, the Financial Times, of all newspapers, ran a story stating that a senior NHS official who was also linked to Peter Mandelson was pressing for the NHS patient data to be handled by Palantir while he was simultaneously advising the company. I mean, you couldn't make this up, could you really? But anyway, we'll then move on to turn to the real terms earnings of NHS staff and how they're lower than they were 15 years ago. Plus anything else anybody who's listening to the X-Based version of this show wants to raise. But first of all, Bob, what about this case of Ghassan Abu Sittah then? I mean, it's already been cleared, hasn't he, by a medical tribunal of any wrongdoing, yet he's got to defend himself again in the High Court. I mean, what the hell's going on? I assume you've been following this case, Bob.
Yeah, so it's quite astonishing what has gone on. So the General Medical Council is the supposedly independent regulator for doctors who want to work in the UK. And they received allegations of anti-Semitism against this esteemed reconstructive surgeon. And they followed an investigation into these allegations, and it was conducted by a separate section of the General Medical Council called the Medical Tribunal Service, MTPS, and they found actually there was no evidence of anti-Semitism, and they cleared him of all charges. And now we're in the ridiculous situation whereby the GMC is appealing against the decision of another part of the GMC. And they are about to spend, hundreds of thousands of GMC members' money, which is the compulsory membership of doctors registered in this country, on trying to undermine the decision of their own body, which found wholly in favor of Dr. Abu Ghassan. So this is quite a ridiculous situation we find ourselves in, and I strongly support the crowdfunder that has been set up to cover the cost of his legal defense fight, which is never cheap in these situations.
No.
And I believe there's an appeal from a Professor Nick Maynard, who's quite an esteemed cancer doctor in Oxford, who's put together some background information.
Hello, I'm Professor Nick Maynard, consultant surgeon and former director of cancer services in Oxford. I'm supporting Dr Ghassan Abu Sittah's legal defence against the GMC, and I want to explain why his case matters for every doctor in the United Kingdom and for some of the world's most vulnerable children. Dr Abu Sittah is a war surgeon who has spent 3 decades treating injured civilians, including children, in conflict zones. A few weeks after he spoke to the world's media about what he witnessed in Gaza, very serious allegations were made against him. He was accused of anti-Semitism and supporting terrorism. He was investigated by the GMC, went through a full tribunal hearing and was completely cleared. The independent tribunal chaired by a barrister who sits on the commission that reviews miscarriages of justice, found that none of the allegations against him were proven. That, of course, should be the end of it. But the GMC is now appealing its own tribunal's decision to the High Court. This raises a fundamental question. What are the implications if the medical regulator can overturn the decision of an independent tribunal which has found no evidence of wrongdoing? If this appeal succeeds, Dr Abu Sittah will face being struck off and his expert care might be lost to some of the world's most vulnerable children. But this case is bigger than one doctor. It's about whether our professional tribunals are truly independent and whether doctors can advocate for their patients without fear. The legal process has already begun. Lawyers must be instructed and evidence prepared, and that work has to be funded now. Please click on the link and contribute to Dr Abu Sittah's legal fund. Every donation defends a doctor's right to speak up for their patients. Thank you very much.
But this reminds me of so many other cases, Bob. I mean, not necessarily linked to the National Health Service, but in academia and in other arenas in the legal field. I know of people who have been caught up in this sort of lawfare tactics that the Zionist lobby utilized to tie people up in all sorts of legal machinations, and it's incredibly costly, time-consuming, very stressful, and it did, it's cost a number of people their career. I mean, I think obviously somebody who I know very well, Professor David Miller, who, like Dr Ghassan Abu Sittah, I mean, he was completely cleared of any wrongdoing by 2 internal QC-led inquiries. And they then said that the University of Bristol, said that he still didn't reach the standards required by the University of Bristol and sacked him as a result of pressure from the Zionist lobby. He subsequently appealed that and won his employment appeal hands down. But the university has appealed that case. And then I know of other people in the medical profession who've been suspended, other people in the, as I say, in the legal field. I mean, accomplished barristers. I mean, who have just been reduced to a shadow of themselves, really, because this is not just a political agenda that they are pursuing. They want to literally, crush people, to totally destroy their career and their lives. Ruthlessness doesn't really, not really an adequate description of the depths to which they plummet in order to attack people. But yes, it's very, very tragic. And this doctor, as I say, you've just been reiterating, Bob, highly accomplished clinician who's having to go through this. It's just, I mean, as I've said previously over other medical professionals who've been targeted, I mean, we should be venerating these people, not targeting them and putting them through this sort of trauma. But there is a crowdfunder, though, that has been set up to help the doctor with his legal costs. And I mean, what do you know about that?
Yeah, so the crowdfunder has been set up. They've got a target to reach of, I believe it's £100,000. They're doing well so far. They've got over £60,000. But as you say, attacking high-profile medics is just one arm of the sort of very broad attack on the freedom of speech, attacks on civil society, be it in the educational field, as with Professor Miller, be it amongst health professionals, doctors, nurses across the board. Hundreds of them have had allegations, fake allegations of anti-Semitism made against them. We saw the whole Corbyn era, his leadership being undermined by these fake allegations. And it's part of the Zionist lobby's approach to silencing any dissent against their agenda to carry out genocide in Gaza and the West Bank. And as we see before our eyes, expanding that agenda to include Iran. Yes, indeed.
Truly shocking. I mean, I don't know where that's all going to end, Bob. I mean, it's slightly off script, but I mean, it's a very frightening time. It's probably the most tense time in my lifetime. I think we're in a more tense period than we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I guess is before your time, Bob, in the early 60s. I mean, I vaguely remember it. I was just a little lad at the time. But where we're going now, I mean, at that point in time, of course, we got somebody the caliber of John F. Kennedy in the White House. A very different kettle of fish to Donald Trump, who's completely in the pocket of the Zionist lobby. And there's speculation that JFK was assassinated, by or at least the Zionist lobby had a hand in his assassination, because he was, as I understand it, sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, but also was hostile to the notion of Israel acquiring a nuclear weapon. And now there's speculation that the Zionist entity, Netanyahu, considering using a nuclear weapon in Iran or against Iran. I mean, because clearly the war isn't going as they anticipated that it would do. And all those little girls that were slaughtered, 160 odd little girls, those female volleyball players that have been killed, and I think the figures now is over 1,300 people have been killed, and goodness knows how many people have been injured. I mean, this is, again, it's going to be a medical catastrophe, isn't it? For the Iranian people, Bob. I mean, it's truly shocking. I mean,
Absolutely, and that's on top of them suffering decades of economic sanctions, which means medical facilities, equipment, essential materials aren't available. On top of that, now they're provoking a humanitarian crisis and disaster. So, but the implications of the Ghassan Abu Sittah case is not just that they're persecuting an esteemed medical person, but it has wider implications in terms of doctors using their ethical standing to speak up against outrages like this. And it also casts a very dark shadow on the independence, supposed independence of the General Medical Council, because clearly it is coming under political pressure to launch this appeal against the one part of the General Medical Council.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, of course, it's not the first time, is it, that the GMC has taken what seems to be a very partial attitude towards doctors, medical professionals who have expressed sympathy with the Palestinian cause and criticised the Israeli atrocities.
Yeah, and it also relates to a conversation we had previously on the General Medical Council being totally complicit in the de-skilling and down-regulation of healthcare professionals by including non-doctors in a regulatory framework of the GMC. Now, the GMC was set up over 100 years ago to protect against quacks practicing medicine.
Yeah.
And now what the GMC is doing is lending professional cover to non-doctors, which is going to create a very big grey area in terms of who is the person the patients are actually going to be seeing when they go to see a health professional, because they will assume that this person is at a doctor level of qualification, whereas they will not be. And that introduces obvious patient safety dangers.
If anybody's got any comments or questions they want to put to Bob on this issue or anything else for that matter, just raise your hand or put a comment in the chat, and we'll put that to Bob. But perhaps we can move on, Bob, to as I mentioned in the introduction there, to Palantir. I mean, this is an interesting case, isn't it? This company which is linked to war crimes in Gaza and obviously connected to Peter Mandelson as well, being awarded this contract to handle all of the NHS patient data. Now, a lot of people have expressed concerns about, well, one, about how this contract was awarded in the first place, but also anxiety about a company like that having access to that patient data. What's your thoughts, Bob? I mean, does it concern you that a company like that has access to this data, and what are those concerns? Why should people be worried about it?
Yeah, so the history of the origins of Palantir are interesting. They came out of a branch of the CIA. We know the CIA has a history of a regime change and participating in, false flag terrorist operations. So to have the American deep state give birth to Palantir, which is headed up by a guy called Peter Thiel, who we know had very close ties to Jeffrey Epstein, and the actions of Palantir in supporting the Israeli government conducting their genocide in Gaza, I would say to any right-thinking person that this is a company that should have absolutely nothing to do with handling any type of public data, let alone NHS data. So this is deeply troubling. And, the CIA agenda that gave birth to Palantir was about mass surveillance, a program called Total Information Awareness, which was to gather data from all aspects of our electronic lives, our internet lives, including social media, including other websites such as LinkedIn, our health record, our tax records, and to merge all this information and to have an electronic portrait of individuals. Yeah. And then we can only guess to what use that will be made. And if the Israeli example is anything to go by, it will not be in the public interest. Mm-hmm. And that's why there's outcry from various groups in this country trying to highlight and raise awareness about the dangers of having Palantir involved in the delivery of government services.
And we're very much going down the road of a surveillance state, aren't we, Bob? I mean, it's not just CCTV cameras on every corner. It's this it's this insidious monitoring of people through their electronic devices, phones, smart TVs, even. I understand, can spy on people, and then the company like this. Having access to NHS patient data, I mean, who knows where that could go and how that could be, used, particularly if you're an individual who is an irritant to the status quo, somebody who rails against, for example, Britain's complicity in a genocide. But it might not be that. It might be other issues that you are concerned about. My fear is that, if companies with a shady sort of record, I mean, could they misuse that data? Could the state then misuse that data? I mean, we know what the state is capable of in this country with the SpyCop revelations, and how they've sought to undermine people who they were deemed to be a challenge to the status quo. I mean, it's a worry, isn't it?
Mm. Well, I think there are several aspects to it. First of all, is this a good use of money? Mm. Is this another example of misallocation of funding? Where was the need for these additional data gathering instruments? Where was the need? What we need to deliver good patient care is human resources and bed capacity, as well as medical instruments and medical pharmaceutical products and the rest of it. So they've generated a supposed need, which is causing cash flow to go out of delivering tangible services to patients. Mm-hmm. So that is a problem. And you also referred to Peter Mandelson's involvement and other people who were within government advocating for contracts with Palantir. That clearly shows a conflict of interest. There's a lack of transparency in what's gone on. And by involving these private corporations, it actually undermines sovereignty and accountability, because no longer is the decision-making and the data control within a sort of publicly, democratically accountable system. Now, as it is, democratic accountability in this country is pretty weak, but it will be non-existent once we've handed control to these private companies.
Yeah, I mean, how long have you been in Fraction GP for, Bob? I mean, how long have you been in the NHS for now, all told?
as a GP over 25 years.
Over 25 years. I don't know whether computerization had come in at the start of your career, but I'm just wondering, how did the NHS manage data before the era of big tech? I mean, and did that work well? Were there problems with it? I mean, is this going to be better? I mean, obviously, notwithstanding the concerns about how it could be misused, but just give us a flavour really about where we've come from, where we're going to, and how things have changed and improved or got worse.
Yeah, I think the NHS of old relied primarily on continuity. So, if you were seeing your GP, you ended up seeing the same doctor more often than not, which is now becoming a bit of a rarity. If you were under hospital care, you had a named consultant, and very often you would see either the consultant or a member of his team. So there was an organizational memory. But as the privatization of the NHS has progressed, they are trying to actively devalue the human element so that the workforce becomes interchangeable. And part of that interchangeability is to the doctor substitution agenda. So they're saying, well, you don't need the knowledge, you don't need the personal memory of the patient, you have the record.
Yeah.
You have the electronic record. And in time, they will start to even more use the decision-making qualities that they are championing of AI, for example. So, it might be great if you're using it in an intelligent and sensitive way as an assistant to a physician. But I think the goal is more and more to replace humans out of the system. And that helps the agenda in other ways because it removes any ethical or moral element to the decision-making between healthcare delivery and the patient. So I think this is a very dark path that we're going down, especially if you consider in parallel there are great pressures to move towards euthanasia, and there's greater denial of access to care. So we will be more and more subjected to algorithmic decisions as to whether you are deemed worthy for whatever criteria of having an operation or having certain treatment. And, people can say, well, this is a trusted algorithm and this is a trusted computer operator or corporation. And the decision is, the computer says no.
Yeah. No, it's really troubling to say the least. And just a reminder to anybody who is interested in making a comment or wants to ask Bob a question, then please feel free to let us know, and we'll bring you in. I think Arame is in the chat. I don't know if she wants to come in and say anything, but we're going to move on now, Bob, if you don't mind, to the survey that was undertaken. I don't know if you saw this, by the Nuffield Trust, which showed that NHS staff are actually, in real terms, earning less today than they were 15 years ago. What's your take on that, Bob? I mean, how's that impacting on the National Health Service in terms of recruitment and things like that?
Yeah, so the report that the Nuffield Trust produced showed various health professionals, health NHS employees, and charted what their wages were doing over the last, I believe it was 15 years, you say. And the average was about -8% in real terms compared to 15 years ago. But compared to the private sector, the average real terms has increased to about 3.3%. So there's a huge disparity. And if you combine that with increasing restriction of access to resources, beds, and the rest of it, then it creates a toxic cocktail of low morale, struggling to make ends meet, as well as a more demanding work environment because of lack of resources. And naturally, that will cause a bit of a brain drain and also force experienced staff to seek early retirement and other forms of exiting the healthcare system. So, without the workforce, the NHS is nothing. But it doesn't seem to me that the government is serious about respecting their pre-election promises about restoring the terms and conditions of staff, because, as we know, politicians say one thing before an election and do something completely different after the election.
Sure, that's been the way with of late anyway, the last sort of 20 years or so. It looks to me, Bob, that it's almost like a perfect storm being created. I mean, you talked about low morale, you talked about, staff retention being an issue, coupled with these other pressures, privatisation, and some of the other points that we were talking earlier on about the way in which big data is, the tech is being utilised to further, diminish the role of the professional and so on. I mean, and so the experience for staff, for the public, is just deteriorating, isn't it, all the time? It seems to me.
Yeah, and that helps the government agenda to break this connection the public have with the NHS. They're gradually losing faith, day by day, losing faith, and at the same time, you're having more employers offering private health insurance as part of their employment package. You're seeing more and more advertising on TV from Bupa and Benetton and various other organizations cashing in on this growing dissatisfaction. And, the junior doctors or resident doctors still remain in dispute with the government. I believe just at the end of last year, they voted once again to carry on being in dispute with government. The GPs sector of the British Medical Association are also threatening to reject this new contract imposition, which is supposed to take place in April. So, clearly the profession is dissatisfied, and our unions are, at least publicly, have the rhetoric of wanting to put up a fight. But experience tells me that often the fight they put up is pretty weak. And certainly the messaging, I put out a Twitter post just a few days ago showing the sort of correspondence that the British Medical Association send members such as myself. And there's not one word of the overarching political agenda, which is privatisation. And part of that includes this doctor substitution and the utter dismantling of traditional general practice.
Is there anybody in the political world that we could turn to? I mean, when I say the political world, I mean I'm talking about people sitting in Parliament to bang the drum for the National Health Service. I mean, when you think back to the fact that it was the Labour Party that introduced the National Health Service, and Nye Bevan, the founding father, said that it would last for as long as there are folk willing to fight for it. I mean, is there anybody, do you think, that's willing to fight for it sitting in the Commons at the moment?
Jeremy Corbyn still understands what the issues are. Yeah. Zara Sultana, I believe, understands what the issues are. They might not be putting it out in the sort of clearest and strongest terms, but there's so much on the political agenda. It's almost as if the NHS has been pushed down as a priority. And even if there were a few more voices within Parliament, it's very likely that they wouldn't get an airing, certainly on mainstream media. So, what the public perceive is what the BBC and others want us to perceive, which is more often than not the government's agenda.
How does Wes Streeting then compare to his predecessor? I mean, we've notionally got a change in government now. I can't remember who the last health secretary was. Was it Jeremy Hunt, or did somebody moved in? He was there for a while, wasn't he? I think it was a different Tory minister by the time of the general election. I mean, has there been any noticeable change in your experience?
No, because the people controlling the agenda are the Big Four accountancy firms, McKinsey. These are the people who devise and write the policies. And unfortunately, the politicians are just frontmen for a continuation of the same. If Wes Streeting was sincere, he would be talking about renationalising the NHS. He would be talking about restoring some of the pay theft that's taken place over the last 15 years, as we discussed earlier. But none of that discussion is happening. He's talking more about giving money to big tech companies. He's actually ridiculing staff as not being efficient and not working hard enough and being moaning minis, I think was one of the phrases he's used. and there's no discussion about increasing NHS bed capacity, which is a massive issue in terms of the catastrophe of corridor care and the deaths associated with that. We know 1 out of 80 people waiting more than 12 hours for a bed after a decision has been made to admit them is dying. That's a preventable death on quite a massive scale. But now it's been normalized. Waiting in corridors for more than 12 hours has become day-to-day normal NHS activity, whether it be winter or the middle of summer.
Is there a class dimension to this, Bob, or is this kind of affecting people pretty much across the piece? I mean, I know people that can maybe afford private healthcare and all the rest of it, private GPs and one thing and another, but if you're in an accident or you've got a chronic condition, you probably, even if you're pretty well off, are still going to be potentially stuck in one of those corridors, aren't you? Or are you? I don't know. I mean, is there a class dimension in your experience?
Yeah, if you're acutely ill, if you have an emergency, a road traffic accident or a heart attack, you're going to be reliant on NHS services. If it's something routine, if you need a routine investigation or a scan, that will be quicker in the private sector. But at the same time, they're reducing NHS capacity for doing scans and everything else because we're getting this outsourcing of more and more NHS activity. So they are actively degrading the infrastructure of the NHS and allowing the private sector to expand. They're creating a market for the private sector. But you're right, people who have insurance, if they develop a serious illness like a cancer, well, they will find year on year their premiums becoming unaffordable. And then they will be priced out of their cover. And that's not an aspect of the whole insurance system within healthcare. That's not an aspect that people quite appreciate.
No, indeed. I think we touched on that a few episodes ago about one particular case where somebody, I think he was a lawyer whose premiums went through the roof. I can't. What was the figure, Bob? Just to remind people, it was unbelievable, the cost.
Yeah, I think it went up from 8,000 to 140,000, around that sort of range. More than a tenfold increase.
And so somebody even pretty well off, pretty well healed, high flying lawyer, that's just kind of impossible. You have to be a kind of a multi-millionaire to be able to afford those sorts of premiums. But Bob, you used a phrase there, which I'm sort of familiar with, but some people listening in may be a little confused by when you talk about renationalising the National Health Service. I think people are vaguely aware of some aspects being externalised of the National Health Service, but might be a little confused about what you mean by renationalising the National Health Service. Because as far as a lot of people are concerned, we've got a National Health Service, and it's funded by the government. What are you on about? And you mean renationalised? Is nationalised in it? So maybe just unpack that a bit so people understand what it is you mean, Bob.
Yeah. So the model of a nationalised health service was a tax-funded system which is delivered by publicly employed professionals without the opportunity for profit extraction. And that gave government ultimate control and responsibility for the care that was being provided. Now, what's happened over the years is a greater proportion of the care is provided by private companies who extract a profit. So that's a big element of privatization gone on there. The NHS Act of 2012, in fact, in law, abolished the NHS because the NHS no longer was going to be a provider of health services. It was going to become a promoter, i.e. just a funding stream. And that's the fundamental basis upon which the NHS was established in 1948. So in effect, that was an abolition act. And what happened in 2022 was the creation of 42 new public-private entities called integrated care boards, which are no longer under democratic accountability. They are corporate vehicles to receive public funding and ultimately have greater and greater autonomy without any democratic oversight to use that budget as they see fit. And any money not spent on healthcare delivery can be kept as profit. Now, that is nothing like beverage and and Bevan's model of the NHS, is it? That is a privatized system with an NHS logo, predominantly going to be delivered for profit.
Yes, yes, indeed. I mean, and just in terms of that democratic oversight, the trust hospitals have this sort of notional democracy of people who are in the vicinity of the hospital. I think they can register and they can participate in a vote to elect the governors of that hospital. What do you make of that model, Bob? I mean, I periodically get I don't know how often it is, but periodically I get a communication through from my local hospital, the Royal Derby, with an invitation to participate in electing the governing body of the hospital. And I guess the kind of new Labourites who introduce this model will say, well, there we go, we've got democratic oversight. There it is.
Yeah, well, we've seen how democratic New Labour has been. We've seen how they sabotaged Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. It's all very rigged. The only way you're going to get into any of these positions is if you're a useful idiot or you're utterly on board with what's going on.
Yeah. Because
anybody I've encountered in senior management within the NHS fits one of those two descriptions, I'm afraid. I actually tried to become part of the management structure just to see how corrupt this whole system is. And it was the Primary Care Trust at the time, and I put my hat in the ring to be the Primary Care Trust chairman. And what they set about doing was having a single candidate election by doing a pre-election interview with a panel of 3 who will decide whether this person is fit and proper. Now, what they mean by that is, will this person do as we tell them? And in fact, I can remember vividly one of the questions from the panelists was, am I prepared to do things that are morally repugnant if asked to do so?
Really?
So this is the setup. Yeah. And if you can arrange a whole political party in a way that you select candidates who have nothing to do with a local community, who are parachuted in because they share an ethos, an ideology of the leadership, well, that's how the NHS has been taken over.
Yeah.
By functionaries who will just do what the political diktat tells them to do.
Just perhaps then in conclusion, Bob, just going back to Nye Bevan's quote that the NHS will last for as long as there are folk willing to fight for it. I think you've touched on this again in previous episodes, but the people, listening to the X-based version of this, people who, watch the video on the Tuesday evening, what can people do to rail against this abuse, really, I suppose, and destruction of our National Health Service, which is still held in high esteem, isn't it, by millions and millions of people in the country?
Yeah, I think our biggest obstacle is awareness. As we discussed earlier, there are very few politicians, certainly with a platform, who are saying very much clearly and loudly about this subject. There's a lot of competition, obviously, on the political horizon in terms of what to discuss. But awareness is very low. Our unions, particularly the health unions, are going along with this quietly. So certainly members of those unions, including Unite, GMB, and others, need to be asking their leaderships what's going on in healthcare, because certainly they're not being informed by the unions. My union, the British Medical Association, never touches on the political agenda. So they're willfully leaving the medical profession in the dark. The RCN is similarly guilty of going along with these reforms, because the leaderships tend to be right-wing and not very interested in fighting for their members. Maybe they think somehow they might benefit financially in future as this progresses, but that is very misguided. So I think the more we can do to challenge and raise awareness amongst ourselves, amongst our own groups, our family, any civil society organization you might belong to, echoing and sharing the stuff that we produce on social media. We have to break this wall of ignorance, this wall of silence on the issue, because that is the only way. And most of my patients who, if we get onto this subject, have got absolutely zero awareness. They come and speak to me, and thankfully they're very grateful for the service that my surgery can provide. But they tell horrific tales of family members who can't access GP services. And they say, how do you do it? I said, I do it because I haven't abandoned common sense ways of delivering primary care, which is to do it with continuity of care so you don't have any duplication of effort, and it becomes a very efficient way of doing things. We are actually slowly losing something very precious, and people, rather than realizing what's going on, are going to turn very angry against the NHS. And my greatest fear is they will welcome its replacement.
Well, that is a worry, isn't it? I mean, we're kind of moving in that direction, as we've said, with this government and indeed the ones before it. And we've got Reform UK in the wings, waiting to introduce a potentially American insurance-based system, which would be an absolute disaster, wouldn't it? I mean, just looking at the chat here, Bob. I mean, I think a lot of people echoing the sort of things that you've been saying yourself, and one individual is saying it's an attack on our institutions that make this country what it is, squeezing everything out of us. No politician addresses the issue, nor how to combat it. They don't want to fight for the people. What else will they campaign on if everything works how it should? I mean, and we're seeing, aren't we, this sort of drive to war in Iran. I mean, it's we've seen the US, and we were saying at the top of the show, Bob, and Israel have mounted this horrendous attack and the implications of that. But now Keir Starmer is allowing the Americans to use British RAF bases for their attacks, claiming it's for self-defense, but it's absolutely absurd. It's just putting us all in great peril, it seems to me. And going back to the point, I often quote Tony Benn in these discussions, and his comment about if we can afford the money to kill people, we can afford the money to help people. And while our institutions, public institutions, are being starved of the resources that they need and are being badly managed, because I know you're saying, as far as the NHS is concerned, Bob, it's not just simply about putting more money in, because that would then be siphoned off. But there's never a shortage of money when they want to go to war. And it's an absolute disgrace, and it is something that we need to stand up together to fight against. And I mean, the priority should be on providing a great national health service and social care and education and higher education. But they don't seem to have that priority. I mean, I don't know where people turn these. Well, we know there are alternatives in the wings. We've got the Workers' Party that you and I are members of, and you've got the Green Party that we collaborated with, and they won that by-election. And there's Jeremy's new party, Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana. Hopefully, they can make a breakthrough, because the consequences are really grim, aren't they, for us going forward? With increased poverty, inferior public services, NHS on its knees, privatised, and so on. And it's going to be the working class that will bear the brunt of that, I think. Is that you, Bob?
Absolutely. The working class are, I'm afraid, being treated as being dispensable. The target of what's going on to the NHS are actually the middle classes, who will be paying twice. They'll be paying through their taxes, and they'll be paying once again through private insurance, which will provide them some psychological security, only to find out they're going to be dumped when they need it most.
Yes, indeed. And just before we close, I think we've got Dr. Rama Aladwan is in the audience, and she's sort of part of the team now. I just wonder whether maybe give the last word to you, Rama, if you're up for saying anything. I don't know if you can unmute yourself and join in.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. That was a great discussion. I totally agree with what's been said, specifically what Bob said. with regards to the management in the NHS and how those who are in positions of authority are unfortunately in collusion with this push for privatization. And I saw it firsthand, actually, as soon as I was a foundation doctor. I do remember when our radiology services were being sort of siphoned off to private sectors. And I remember the clinical director of the radiology department at the time was actually himself involved with his own limited company that would take on those extra out of hours or additional scans to report. And he was involved in also interviewing the potential candidates to fill in those gaps, and would turn away many. So it is not just at the government level who are pushing the privatization. Unfortunately, at every single stage, there seems to be people who are involved in it, and they seem to be the people who are picked and chosen or are allowed to remain in those positions, because then they sort of help with the overall strategy. I also remember the hospital that I was in during my foundation years used to have weekly meetings to try and get rid of one certain doctor who was doing this, and they were in a very high position. For example, this person would get a check of tens of thousands a month, was living near Cheryl Cole. But this is the sort of disaster that we have in our NHS. Yeah. It is at every single level, unfortunately. And I totally agree with Bob. It does really start with awareness, because we don't really see the NHS being spoken about like this, like it's been spoken about in this space, really anywhere else.
Well, thanks very much for those comments, Rame. And I mean, hopefully we can raise or help to raise awareness through this show that we are now doing every week with yourself and Dr Bob Gill. It is such an important issue, and people are really going to miss it if it goes. So we really do need to do everything we can, I think, to fight for it, and to really honour the likes of Nye Bevan. That phrase that he said, to repeat it again, the NHS will last for as long as there are folk willing to fight for it. And we've really got to fight for it, because it is in mortal danger, as there are a lot of our other public services. And we seem to be moving perilously close to the potential third world war. It's a truly dangerous world in which we are living in at the moment, and it's important for us all, I think, to stand together to demand that the common sense prevails. But thanks very much indeed anyway for today. Thank you for your comments, Dr. Rama, and thank you, Bob, again, and thank everybody for listening in, and for those who are watching on the Tuesday night, thank you as well. And we should be back same time not the same time, actually. We're going to move to a slightly later time, I beg your pardon, on the Sunday. It will be the same time on the Tuesday, the video version of this, but next week we'll be starting at 6 o'clock. So hopefully you can tune in then and spread the word, as Dr. Rame was saying there. It's really important that we expose more and more people to these discussions, and people can put their two penneth in it as well. We do have that sort of open house approach where people can have their own say and put comments for consideration and questions to Bob, and together we can build an unstoppable force to save our National Health Service for children that come after us. But with that comment, this is Chris Williamson saying bye for now, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.